This theory, thought, or prediction originated from a YouTuber called Neo Nobody in his latest video. To start off, we know that most of the FNAF game titles doesn't necessarily point directly to what the game is about. For example, Security Breach isn't all about security being breached, and sister location can both be linked to Mike's sister's location and a sister location to Freddy's within Fazbear Entertainment. The Mimic is heavily believed to mimic Gregory, who is a replication of FNAF 4 Crying Child's David, as we can see on their similar appearances and clothing. Next, we have the book called Tales from the Pizzaplex Bobby Dots, which gives us a story about Edwin Murray with his deceased son David. Another David, and maybe a parallel to CC Dave, since they are both linked with having plushies, like Fredbear with Crying Child and Tiger Plush with David Murray. Why am I bringing this up? Well, if Gregory himself is a robot and a replication of David, maybe the Mimic has a similar backstory. The Mimic originates from 1979 thanks to the trailer that we can see in the Secret of the Mimic trailer, and we know that it has been around for a while. Who else has been around for a while? Well, David Afton. I believe that there might be a possibility that David will appear in the game, somehow linked to the Mimic, and just maybe mimicking Cece's voice, whose voice will later be used through the robot Gregory in Security Breach. Also, future line here, another thing that might suggest Cece's return, well, the camera feed as shown in the trailer shows a weird looking liquid. Obviously, the liquid might be from the emulsion from the camera when upon printing photos into the camera film roll. I believe that this red liquid is in fact blood, and more specifically, blood connected to the bite of 83. Why do I believe this? Well, you see, Steelwool was trying to rewind everything back to the beginning using a film roll. During the rewind we can spot the red ink, which might literally come from the same time as the bite of 83 is believed to have occurred. Hence why I believe this is the blood from the big bite. I know that some will say that Edwin is mostly a parallel of Henry and that David would be Charlie, but if you look at the previous books, we know that these parallel things can mix up Henry's family with the Afton's family. First, we know that the Afton family and Henry's family are reversed in the FNAF movie, since there are the 3 Afton siblings, except that they are named Schmidt, and that Afton is now the one that has one daughter instead of Henry. There might also be a possibility that Edwin might parallel both Henry and William, since he has a robotic expertise just like Henry, and is a father to a son named David, just like Afton. We can see a similar story or example of a character paralleling 2 characters from the game lore, because in the book Fazbear Frights Part 2 Fetch, there's a boy named Alec who parallels both Mike and the Crying Child. And about the Crying Child Mimic connection, we already have another David that has been tied to the Mimic in Tales from the Pizzaplex Bobby Dots, as I mentioned earlier. There might even be a possibility that we'll see more of the FNAF 4 characters, such as the bullies from the Bite of 83, as mentioned by Game Theory, but also other characters such as the other kids we see in the FNAF 4 minigames. Another, maybe, small thing I noticed while writing the first paragraph is that there is a strong connection between Charlie and David. Circus Baby was built by Henry to mimic his daughter Charlie, but was soon turned to be Afton's daughter Elizabeth. The same goes with the Mimic, who was probably built by Henry to mimic someone else, someone that we may find out in the game, but it was later taken on by Afton to mimic one of his own child instead, in this case, David. I wanted to write this since I like this thought of Afton taking Henry's creations and able to mimic or recreate his deceased children. Just like the puppet, the Mimic is introduced with a music box, and as we know, the puppet is possessing Henry's daughter, Charlie. It wouldn't surprise me if even Afton's son Dave would go on to do the same thing, but with the Mimic instead, following the same pattern. Just to be clear, Dave isn't possessing him, just a Mimic version. Another thing, compared to YouTuber Neo Nobody, I believe that the phrase "remember what you saw" from FNAF 4 is mainly about Dave being reminded of his nightmares created by William. This would also make sense for the Fredbear plushie, or William, knowing his son's nightmares, since he probably created them from his underground location as we see in Sister location. I am not entirely disagreeing with Neo's theory about the "remember what you saw" phrase, and it wouldn't surprise me if this is another retcon in FNAF. And to be clear, if the player tries to go to the stage where the animatronics are, Fredbear or William will try to remind you that we have seen these characters before, but as nightmares. hence why I think that's the case here. The shadows of his nightmares are misunderstood by David, who's believing that the animatronics are the nightmares he's dreaming about. This is my view or take on the misunderstanding part from Scott's quote, "What is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child." Over to random but fun theories I noticed while watching the Supreme Guide is that the quote from Hand Unit in the opening scene while starting the pizzeria simulator is literally a hint to what we see happen in Ruin.
Aside from the daily risk of lawsuits, there's also the risk that something might be hiding inside whatever you just purchased with that steeply discounted price tag. Of course, that would only be a serious danger if there were something outside that's been trying to get in for months now, which we are not confirming to be the case.
Unbeknownst to Mike, he has purchased something he didn't know existed, and the Mimic will now try to find a way out. There is also something about the Mimic's clown mask resembling Ennard's clown mask. This might actually be a coincidence or just a clown mask that can be worn by different animatronics, such as Ennard and the Mimic, but it can also explain how the Mimic is linked to Ennard and the other Fine Time animatronics as well, through the green chip seen in Sister Location. This would then lead us to most of FNAF's own theory about Circus Baby and Security Breach, so I'll leave that for now. This lead I believe the least, and I'm sticking to the theory of FNAF 4 and the other characters' return. And about the Mimic using old costumes, FNAF has introduced previous mascot suits that hasn't re-entered the franchise for a long time. I'm talking about the Sister Location faceplate suits from Night 4. There might be a possibility that we'll see suits like, for example, the one with faceplates, but honestly, guess we'll see the real truth when the game comes out, but this is my prediction. Thanks for listening.